Okay, good evening, everyone. As you know, the Parsha, or maybe you don't know, that's why you're here in the Shiur. The Parsha is Terumah. And really, this Parsha transitions from the Revelation. It takes place on Sinai, only two Parshiot ago. And now it's about building a home for Hashem. And up until this point, there's been a lot of drama. Like everything seems to be dramatic. Egypt, the plagues in Egypt, the sea splitting, the thunder and lightning, the shofar at Sinai, the voice of Hashem, Aseret Dibrot, tremendous encounter with godliness. What underpins Sinai experience is that the Jewish people were passive, right? They didn't have to do anything. They stood, they trembled, they listened. The mountain burned, the heavens opened, the earth shook, and Hashem appears from above. So revelation comes from above, but the people themselves, the Bnei Israel, are passive. They're watching, they're listening, everything transpire. And then something changes. And we're in this week's Parsha of Terumah. There's no thunder, there's no lightning, there's no shofar blast, but rather Hashem says, and maybe you can picture it as this very small and silent request, but Hashem tells the people, or asks the people, or instructs the people, "V'yikchu li truma," take for me a contribution. And then what follows is the central declaration, Va'asu li mikdash, make for me a mikdash, a holy tabernacle, a sanctuary, V'shachanti b'seicham, and I will dwell among them. Now, this is quite revolutionary. At Sinai, Hashem revealed himself, and now in Terumah, we build a place for him. At Sinai, holiness overwhelms the people. Now in Terumah, holiness requires initiative. Holiness requires now that the Jewish people are moved to action. And I want to try explore three ideas, if you like, within this parsha. One is why the Mishkan is necessary at this point in Jewish history. And again, when I use the word Mishkan, it refers to that portable tabernacle, the forerunner of what would be the Beit HaMikdash, the two temples in Jerusalem. So that's the Mishkan. So why? Why is there the need for a Mishkan at this point in Jewish history? Um, what does the Mishkan represent spiritually, psychologically? And what Terumah demands of us today. In other words, how do we make this? And I try to do this in every Parsha Shiur, but how do we try and make it practical to our lives today? Okay, so firstly, your Ramban Nachmanides um, says something, he writes something quite foundational. And he says that the Mishkan is in fact not a new idea. He, in fact, calls it or describes it as a continuation of Har Sinai, a continuation of Mount Sinai. Why? Because at Sinai, the Shekhinah, God's presence, descended onto the mountain. And again, yes, there was cloud, there was fire, there was God's voice. The presence was manifest and terrifying. But Sinai, that experience was temporary. The Jewish people couldn't remain at the mountain forever. So what happens then when the mountain experience ends and the Jewish people are now told to travel away from the mountain? So Ramban Nachmanides says that the Mishkan preserves Sinai in a portable form, a form that could be taken with them wherever they went. The same cloud that rested on Sinai rests in or rests on the Mishkan. The same fire, the same divine speech, the same awe. But now it's localized, it's given structure, it's contained somewhat. And whereas Sinai was this explosive revelation, the Mishkan becomes the sustainable revelation. What do we deal with? How do we take it with us? And this then is the critical transition between Yitro, the Parsha, Yitro, two Parshiot ago, giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, God's revelation on Sinai, and now Terumah. That inspiration has to have, maybe you could say, has to now have infrastructure. Um, and we all know this in our lives. We all know what it's like to experience a Sinai moment in our lives. Maybe we've come out of a powerful Yom Kippur. The Chazan was really, really great. Or it was a life-changing Shiur, or a moment of crisis and clarity that came from that. Could be a simcha, a wedding, birth of a child, a brush with, God forbid, one's mortality. So this is all of these one can describe as moments when heaven feels close. But those moments, just like Sinai, those moments fade. And then the real question becomes, what happens the next day? And our Parsha Terumah answers, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to build. You build containers. You create structure. You establish space. You form habits. You form discipline. And it's, if we're using this metaphor of building, it's now, one could say that the spiritual electricity must now be wired into the walls. Otherwise, what happens is that inspiration dissipates. So the Mishkan is the architecture. The Mishkan is the building of sustained inspiration. It's going to take us and allow us to take whatever we got, all that inspiration from Sinai, into the rest of our journey throughout life. And the people, our forefathers, obviously being the first ones. Now, obviously, God, Hashem, doesn't need a house. We the ones that need a system to preserve God's revelation. Now, why would Hashem, um, the infinite, choose a finite dwelling? Why does he choose? And we told all the materials, the gold, the silver, the copper, the materials that needed to be used, the wood, the trees. But there's, in fact, there's a deeper question. Um, why would God, who fills the heaven and earth, choose to dwell in a confined structure? And there's a beautiful um, parable that's given in the Midrash of Shmot Rabbah, and it gives this parable. And it says that a king had a beloved daughter. And when she married and moved away, the king said to her husband, the son-in-law, I can't separate from her, but at the same time, I understand I can't move with you. But build me a small room wherever you live so that I may dwell near her. And what's the parable? What's the analogy? The Torah is God's beloved daughter. And when he gave it to Bnei Israel, when he gave it to our ancestors, he says, I cannot leave it. I cannot leave you. So build me a dwelling place. So the Mishkan is not about God needing space. It's about a relationship. God needing a relationship with us, and we needing a relationship with Him. And that love, as we all know, love needs proximity. Love needs a closeness. Um, Interesting to note that the Torah uses a strange term. It says, "Asuli mikdash," that's a commandment. Make for me this mikdash. But then it says, "V'shachanti betocham," that I may dwell in them. It doesn't say "V'shachanti betocho." It should say, "And I should dwell in it." Build me this mishkan, and I'll dwell in it. But it says, "I'm going to dwell in them." And the Al-Sheikh asks the famous question. In fact, he's not the only one that asks the question. Why is it like this? And he answers that the true Mishkan is actually the human beings, actually us. The structure of the Mishkan is symbolic, but the ultimate dwelling place of Hashem is within each and every one of us. It's within our hearts. And the Mishkan isn't God shrinking himself into space. It's us, it's man expanding our capacity for presence. So God doesn't need to move into a building. People need to grow. We need to be able to become the vessels. So that's what it is. A beautiful explanation. Yes, build this Mishkan. There is going to be a symbolic house where Hashem's presence dwells. But the fact that it says, and I will dwell within them, means it is just that. Realize that the Mishkan is just a symbol. What I want, what God says He wants, is to be able to dwell within each and every one of us. We have to be able to make space for Hashem to dwell within ourselves. And what type of person does Hashem want to dwell with, be close to? Obviously, a good person, a person who subscribes to all the values, the ethos, the ethics of Judaism. Person is able to bring spirituality and godliness into every aspect of his or her life, business life, wherever it is. There should never be something as just mundane. The mundane itself has to be infused with spirituality, with godliness. So yes, we have a macro mikdash, but we're all supposed to be micro. We're the microcosm of that mikdash. We're supposed to be a holy vessel to accept Hashem within ourselves and to take that expression of God wherever we go and interact with people and to interact with the environments around us. Now, again, something very, very interesting. I mentioned that Hashem says, "V'yikchu li trumah," give a donation, give a contribution. But the word "vayichu" actually means take a contribution. Why does it use the word take? Or should have said "vayitnu," give a contribution. It says "vayichu," take. And the Orach Chaim, possibly one of the earliest ones to mention it, but again, many other commentators mention the same thing, that giving to holiness is never loss. The act of giving reconfigures identity. When you give money to a cause, you don't simply lose funds, but you attach yourself to a purpose. When you give time to Torah, you don't lose hours, you gain depth. The Terumah is not primarily about the contribution, it's not primarily about gold, it's about transformation of the giver. So again, whenever we give tzedakah or whenever we give towards something of a Torah or a mitzvah concept, yes, the 100 Rand we gave, yes, our bank balance in that moment does depreciate, does decrease by 100 Rand, but we should never think that we've become poorer. And in fact, Hashem always tells us that when you give, you're going to be getting back. You're going to be taking back so much more than what you gave. And that's why it uses the word v'yikchu, take, in the context of giving, because when you give, you really never lose. You never give up on something. You're actually getting back. You're taking back so much more than what you gave. I mentioned in shul this evening just something briefly on this particular issue as well. That is one area of Jewish life or Jewish observance where we were able to, in fact, test Hashem. We can say to Hashem, Hashem, I'm going to give, but you make sure that I'm going to be doubly reciprocated. And in fact, we actually see it in the mitzvah where the Torah tells us to tithe, to give a tenth of one's produce. It says aser to aser. And normally that's translated as you shall surely. The double expression means you shall surely tithe. And that's mentioned in many other places where we have the double expression. But it can also be aser to asher. Give a tithe in order that you should become yourself rich. And that's the concept. When we give tzedakah, we never ever become poor in the process. I'll just quickly share a short idea, short story told in the name, I think, of Rothschild. Rothschild was once asked by one of the royals, um, tell me how much you're worth. Give me a balance sheet of all your assets. And the next day, apparently Rothschild handed over a sheet to this royal. The royal looks at it and says, Rothschild, this is in fact indeed quite an impressive balance sheet, but this is hardly your net worth. You've left out so much. We all know you're much wealthier than this. To which he responded, what I've put on this sheet is what I've given in charity, because that is eternal. That is my true balance sheet, because that's what I take with me in the world to come. It's what I actually give. Those are my biggest returns, and that is what I can express as my true balance sheet. And that's again expressed in the expression of taking when it in fact should be giving. Also in this week's Parsha, it says that who should these contributions be taken from? It says, Ma'et kol ish asher yidvenu liboy, from every person, literally, whose heart inspires him to give. So again, something very novel. The Mishkan is not funded through taxation. It's not funded through coercion. There's no social pressure. But it's really built from voluntary generosity, from a person wanting to give. And why? Why is this? So the Shekhinah, God's presence, rests only where there is a ratzon, where there is willing desire. God doesn't want to dwell with someone who feels coerced to do something. God doesn't want to dwell in forced compliance. He dwells where there's voluntary, where there's a ratzon, where there's wool. And it's quite an extraordinary concept. The Mishkan is built from the hearts before it's in fact built from materials. So yes, all these materials are brought forward, the gold, the silver, the copper, the skins, all the articles, the materials. But even where does it truly come from? Where's it really being built from? It's coming from the lay, from the heart of the people. That's really the foundation of the Mishkan. And we all know that two people can give um, identical nuggets of gold, if we can use that example. And one gives reluctantly and one gives joyfully. Only one of them builds a sanctuary. Only one of them builds a mikdash, something we can really call holy. Interesting. There's also a Kliyaka. Kliyaka is one of the foundational commentators on the Chumash, and he says that gold, silver, copper, the main metals, precious metals that were given as donations, in fact, represent three modes of our service of Hashem. And he says that gold corresponds to service of Hashem out of love. Silver corresponds to service out of awe, and copper corresponds to service out of obligation. Obviously, we see them as descending orders of levels. Of obviously, the highest level should be out of love, thereafter out of awe or fear, thereafter out of obligation. And the idea is that not everyone serves on the same level, or not everyone serves on the same level all the time. Sometimes we might give at a gold standard level, sometimes it might be silver, sometimes it might be copper. Sometimes we're driven by a burning love, sometimes we're driven by reverence. Other times it may just be that our strict habit, our strict discipline. And the truth is, the Mishkan is all of all three. And if you think about it, it's really a democratic vision of holiness. That is not only standing on the gold, it stands on the copper too. And sometimes we think that only the spiritually elite can really build holiness or create holiness. And Torah, in the particular Parsha of Terumah, tells us absolutely not. It's not just the spiritually elite. It's not only the great scholars and the great rabbis, but every Jew is a builder. Your love, your fear, your obligation, everything that you give and how you give it is a brick or is a contribution towards that Mishkan. And every single Jew, every single person is kadosh, is holy. Um, very, very interesting as well. I might end on this. I'll just see how time goes. But the Torah describes the instruction to build the vessels of the Mishkan before the actual Mishkan itself. So we first have the ark, the holy ark. Then we have the table. Then we have the instructions regarding the menorah. And only afterwards does it actually describe the structure itself, that being the Mishkan. And why? Surely you'd say, give us the instructions, give us the blueprint for the actual structure itself, and then we're going to furnish it. Then we'll go buy. Think about you building a house. You build the house first, then you go and furnish it. Why were the furnishings detailed before the actual house itself? And again, the beautiful lesson is because Judaism is content first. You don't build a building and then ask what it stands for. If you think of a corporation or a company, they're not going to build a big structure. They're not going to build it and then decide, well, what really is the purpose or why are we building? You've got to know why you're building before you build. So you first define the purpose. Then afterwards you create the form. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch emphasizes that the Mishkan is an educational model. The Ark, the Holy Ark, represents Torah, so it's intellectual and moral truth. The table represents material life, like we all eat on the table. The menorah represents spiritual illumination. And it's these three pillars that really define Jewish existence. Only once those values are clear do we construct the walls. And that's, of course, it's a powerful communal lesson. Institutions without values are just merely empty shells. Structures without purpose, they're not going to last very long. They're going to decay. And the ark comes first. Of all the furnishings, the ark comes first because why? Because Torah defines everything. Torah is the starting point from everything. Okay, I still got a few more minutes. I will touch on another issue as well. The ark. We know how the ark had to be made. The ark is wood overlaid with gold inside and gold outside. Now, again, you've got a wooden block. Inside the wooden block is gold, and outside is gold as well. And the Gemara teaches that any Torah scholar whose inside doesn't match his outside is not authentic. And again, many of you have thought to yourselves, or maybe even said it out loud, that maybe you see people who purport to be religious, they wear the uniform, so to speak, but they're not acting as such a person should act. Well, that's the Aaron trying to say that your outside and your inside, the gold that's outside has to match the gold that's inside, or vice versa. The gold that's inside has to match the outside. There has to be absolute authenticity and integrity. Internal is gold and external is gold. Um, it's not about the facade. It's not about a polished exterior when the interior is hollow. You've got to have gold on the inside and gold on the outside. And in a world that's obsessed with image, Terumah, this Parsha insists on essence. That holiness begins inward. In fact, on this concept where the Torah speaks about the matriarchs being beautiful, right? And a person might think, okay, it's nice that they happen to be good looking, but surely Torah is more about, has to be more than skin deep. And the answer is, of course it is. Where it speaks about Sarah or Rivka or Rachel being beautiful, they were, but that beauty came from inside. It was an internal beauty that radiated outwards. If it wasn't for the internal beauty that they had, the gold inside of themselves, there wouldn't have been any gold manifest. They wouldn't have had that beauty outside as well. Um, okay. I'm going to end with one more thing. The poles, very, very interesting, is that when the ark was transported, it was carried via poles. Poles went through circular hooks, and that's how it was carried. But there's an important instruction, important a mitzvah relating to the ark, which stated that even when the ark was not traveling and the ark was stationary, the poles could never be removed from the ark. And the question is why? The Netziv explains that the Torah must be perpetually ready to move. What does this mean? It means Jewish history is not stationary. And if you look at Jews, we've wandered continents, we've faced exile, we've rebuilt repeatedly. And the ark's poles symbolize resilience. They were able to move, were able to adapt. It should never be anchored in geography alone. So it's not just one space that you can say that this is where Torah needs to be fulfilled. Of course, a caveat to that is that we know that there's a big mitzvah to be involved, to live in Jerusalem. There are many in Israel, there are many mitzvot which can only be performed in Israel. So, of course, Torah observance and living and performance of mitzvahs has a much higher quality about it than in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora. But that aside, Torah never has a set place, a set resting place, a set destination. It always has to be on the move. It always has to be ready to move from place to place. And it has application in absolutely every place that we find ourselves in. Um, I just want to see what other notes I had here. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there. I think I've covered everything that I really wanted to cover tonight. Hope it's giving you a little bit more food for thought. And we read about it in Shul this coming Shabbos. It's not just about an assembly process and not about just a structure that's built and the exact measurements. By the way, I will say something on that just as I'm mentioning it, that it wasn't left to man's devices alone. Go build a house for Hashem, and okay, let's go build a nice house. There were exact measures given because, again, there has to be discipline. There has to be a framework within which we're able to practice our Judaism and to give expression to that. Can't just be something that's a laissez-faire that's given to us and we can do whatever we want with. No, there's certain rules, there's certain parameters, and it's within those parameters and within those rules, that's where we're given our full expression of our Judaism and of our Yiddishkeit. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining, and see you all, please God, soon.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Pleasure.